Hello, my friends. This is End Times Analysis. I'm Pastor Jeff. Get a cup of coffee, have a seat, and let us reason together. Tonight we are trying to try to finish up Ezekiel 38:15. We're going to review and then we're going to go into the new material. I'm going to read it first, of course. And thou shalt come from thy place out of the north parts, thou and many people with thee, all of them riding upon horses, a great company, a mighty army. Our review, we've talked about this a little bit before, but out of the north parts. God keeps repeating this point. There's no question about the direction of the threat. Gog is a northern power, and the country is in the far north, and the country that is in the far north of Israel is Russia. This area has a long history of anti-Semitism. The Tsar had pogroms, state-sponsored persecution of the Jews. If you remember, even the movie Fiddler on the Horse of Play and the movie Fiddler on the Roof, at the very last part of the movie, it shows all of these individuals of Jewish descent being forced to leave the country, not just their homes, not from one place to another, but they were kicked out, and that happened more than once. And there was all kind of persecution, some local, some in the entire nation. Now, let's go on a little bit more. Even under communism, Stalin, he thought Israel would be inclined to be communist or have a communist tilt. So he allowed Czechoslovakia to supply Israel with arms in its War of Independence in 1948. When he realized that Israel was going to have a lot more of a Western tilt, he started to curtail employment for the Soviet Jews. Of course, he cut off arms sales. And even when his foreign secretary, Molotov's wife, who was Jewish, celebrated Israel official Golda Meir's visit to the Soviet Union, she was arrested and put into the Gulag. And his last cruel act, right before he died, was the doctor's plot. A supposed purge of Jewish doctors who he accused, which we know was a false accusation, of killing Soviet officials. And Stalin was going to use his purge to relocate a large portion of his Jewish population to the Soviet Jewish Autonomous Zone, which is really right north of Manchuria and around in Asia, right north of China. Another portion was, of course, to be killed, and the others, what was left of those, was going to be sentenced to the Gulag, which is the Soviet prison system. Even later, under Brezhnev, the Jews suffered. They called themselves refusnik. They were dissenters. Some were put into psychiatric institutions for protesting and standing against the regime. Others were jailed. And the reluctance of the Soviet Union to allow its Jewish people to immigrate to Israel cost the Soviet Union most favored nations trade status with the United States in the 1970s. Now, let's look at another portion of that scripture, riding upon horses. Once again, we see this repeated. They are fast movers. In ancient times, horses were a sign of wealth, a well-equipped military. And usually they had a cavalry and the leaders were on horses. For the entire army, especially an army this size, to be riding on horses was unheard of. Even in Babylon, which was at that time the richest empire the world had seen, the richest and one of the most powerful. But the rank, not just leaders, like I said, but the rank and file soldiers. So all the military is well equipped. In ancient times, the military had different ranks of troops. The frontline troops were better equipped than the archers and the slingmen. Auxiliary was even less. Think of the movie Braveheart, when Longshanks, which was Edward II, when he battled William Wallace, he sent his Irish troops in, or might even call them mercenaries. And these troops were not as well equipped as the English troops. So that thing of having your frontline troops or the troops that you know are the most loyal, better equipped, better done, so you know they have a better chance of surviving, went on a long way. Now let's tie this together. We talked about how Russia has been known to use very conservative military tactics. But they have in their past used aggressive tactics in their many wars against the Ottoman Turkish Caliph, in World War II with Zhukov being pressured by Stalin. But the agent here, thing we got to look at here, what makes this work is a bold general with the confidence and support of the political class. A general would arise who had the confidence of the Tsar, the general secretary, in this case, Gog. But let's look at the Ukraine and Syria, because we're going to be looking at the more of the conservative side. Now, each side in Syria, no one is willing to deliver a knockout blow. Putin is a good chess player. He is playing what a lot of chess people would call the long game. He wants to keep his troops in the Middle East. He also can keep, with his troops in the Middle East, he can also keep Iran under partial control against Israel. He doesn't want Iran to suffer any defeats. So he keeps his troops to act as an undesignated peacekeeper. Can you see that? His troops are there. His anti-aircraft is there, but also his troops are keeping everyone up kind of in their area, their designated area. So with this, he is pressuring Iran/Persia, and he gives the Revolutionary Guard a get-out-of-war-free card. They can look back to the faithful in the home country and say, I would attack, but I can't. Russia is between me and Israel. So instead, they use a proxy, which is Hezbollah in Lebanon. And they even have used Hezbollah in Syria, fighting the terrorists and the rebel groups. Putin doesn't want to escalate the war against the terrorists or against the Syrian rebels. He has a constant enemy in ISIS and the insurgents in Syria. And the Syrian military that is totally reliant on Russia. It is in the Russian interest to let these other groups survive and allow the Western powers to occupy parts of Syria in its small oil region. Taking Syrian oil, it gives Russia a great talking point. We don't hear it in our news, but over there, they hear it a lot. A great talking point. Think about this. You are a Syrian. You are an Iranian. You're even Turkish or Lebanese. And you hear the West is only interested in us when we have oil. Using the old imperialist tag, they are taking what is ours and using it for them. And now add in the terrorist groups, the frequent uprising from other sectors of the population, the Druze protests, which has been popping up. And they're going against Assad for corruption, and I think food and other taxes have gone up. Now, Assad will have to allow Russian troops to remain in Syria in order to stay in power. But as long as he needs Russia and Iran, he will look weak to his people. So he will fall further in debt to Russia and Iran. This is an old Soviet tactic. Put an unpopular leader or an unpopular government in power over a restless population. So the government that you install or help to keep in power has to rely on you, or back then, a threat of an invasion of the Red Army. This tactic was used in Eastern Europe in order to maintain power. Such was the immediate threat of an when the immediate threat of an invasion was removed by Gorbachev, the Eastern European Rebellion of 1989 occurred and the Warsaw Pact collapsed. So the Gog paradigm saw the fall of the Warsaw Pact in Eastern Europe. So what is a paranoid Gog to do? You must bind your allies to you. Keep them in need, and they can't betray you. The rulers of the Kremlin have never forgotten the loss of Egypt. Egypt was supposed to be their linchpin. Egypt was supposed to be to the Soviet Union what England is to America, a special relationship. And under Nasser, that was there. Nasser was into Arab nationalism. He was trying to grow almost like a caliph. He was binding together. Him and Syria even bound together in many different forms and different ways. He was reaching out. He was giving the Arabs, those individuals, a sense of pride in their nationalism. Then after he died, Sadat came in. Uh, and it was a whole different relationship. Gog will not allow these type of independence to come in. He understands he is taking these risks by bringing in this coalition. If you look at Russia history with allies, we talked about it before, it's not good. Go back to the Sino-Soviet split. Go back, of course, to Egypt. Go back to other countries that even their client states. The Communist Party had trouble in Iraq and other places. There's things that you just have to realize that we don't understand, but being a part of the Gog paradigm, this is their life. This is what they're living. So Gog, when he moves down, and he is coming down from the far north. He is taking a risk. He is moving his armies down to the Middle East. His logistic supply lines are vulnerable. So how is he going to secure his rear? Make these countries that he is transversing on his invasion route his allies, or buy them off. So he will not be concerned about these other countries, or he is assured by other nations of non-interference, or his strength in his coalition and the brilliance of his leaders make him arrogant. Some of these things have to happen. So we can't even imagine defeat. He is correct, of course, until the sovereign God steps in. Israel is realizing it is facing this force alone. How is this happening? What must happen to the Western powers, the military, political, and our national policy? What can come between the United States and its most faithful ally? Remember, this is not a prophecy channel. This is an analysis channel. We are looking at probability and outcome. So we're going to talk about different things, different scenarios that can come up. Now, let's look at the possibility of these scenarios and look at the United States. What has got to happen for the United States to stand by and watch this extremely important region as far as energy goes, to just stand by with their hands in their pockets, wondering what's happening? Could it be a disturbance in the civil order? Some people are claiming what they call a national divorce, or maybe even a civil war, maybe a turning of the population against Israel due to its settlement policy in the West Bank of Judea, Samaria. Anti-Semitism is on the rise in the governments of the world. Could a binding non-interference vote by the UN hold off the Western powers? For example, the UN comes up with a resolution that no power can, an arms embargo or a friendship embargo, you cannot help Israel until Israel removes these settlements. That could happen. Now, an economic crisis, a debt death spiral, that could happen, a type of hyperinflation that goes into depression, or some type of long recession that comes in. The de-dollarization, we are seeing this with the BRICS, and many other countries are trying to limit their exposure to the dollar due to the dollar being weaponized and used for sanctions. The loss of the world reserve currency by the United States will put it in a extreme bind. If the United States has to use the SDR, which is a special drawing right, which is a type of currency, it could become very expensive to help Israel or any other nation. Or could the United States put itself under a budget agreement? We've had these budget agreements before under George H.W. Bush and under different presidents. They put themselves under a budget agreement so they cannot exceed. In other words, the debt ceiling is here. You raise the debt ceiling, and I'll put myself under this type of agreement so we do not raise any more funds, or do not raise the debt ceiling for this length of time. Any of these things are a possibility and could tie the United States' hands. So, my friends, thank you so much for spending this time with me. If you liked the video, found it informative, please hit the subscribe and the like button. And until we see each other again, Maranatha.